Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping straight into a staggering math problem that is quite literally changing the invisible scaffolding of global power. We are looking at a completely lopsided battle that challenges, well, basically everything we thought we knew about modern military strategy.
Just think about this jarring contrast for a second. You've got an offensive weapon that costs about the same as a mid-range sedan, squaring off against a multi-million-dollar defense missile. It sounds like a bad joke, right? But it's actually the defining military reality of our time. While superpowers have spent decades building up these massive, terrifying muscles, they are now increasingly facing an enemy running a vastly different and vastly cheaper playbook.
So you naturally have to ask the million, or I guess multi-million-dollar question. How does a tiny piece of hardware, basically a glorified RC plane, prove that expensive weapons don't actually win wars, but effective ones do? How can something so ridiculously cheap threaten a system with essentially unlimited funding?
To really get this, we first need to unpack the core concept of this explainer, which is asymmetric attrition. Basically, this is a strategy where a combatant uses vastly cheaper, unconventional means to continuously drain the resources of a superior military force. They keep going until that superior force is economically exhausted. So the battle isn't won by superior firepower, it's won by economic bleeding. It's literally death by 1,000 incredibly cheap paper cuts.
The $20,000 flying triangle. Let's see exactly how this builds in a predictive scenario set in one of the most critical geopolitical choke points on Earth.
Picture the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East. It's this narrow, 21-mile wide hallway of water. But get this, a staggering 20% of the world's oil passes through this specific stretch every single day. It is a wildly sensitive artery for the entire global economy.
Now, if a conflict breaks out here, the traditional American playbook is incredibly well documented. Launch overwhelming airstrikes, completely obliterate the enemy's air force and navy, and then just wait for the regime to collapse. It's that classic decapitation strategy that worked on Saddam Hussein. And hey, on paper, it looks like a flawless, guaranteed knockout punch. But here is the crucial reality check. Asymmetric warfare doesn't happen on paper. When the unstoppable force meets the incredibly cheap object, the entire game changes. Because the real threat emerges once those multi-million-dollar jets leave the airspace. The nightmare doesn't come from a massive carrier strike group, it comes from a handful of people launching hardware from the back of a completely normal civilian flatbed truck.
Meet the weapon causing all this chaos, the Shahed 136. It's a small, slow, but incredibly cheap GPS-guided kamikaze drone. We're talking just 11 feet long, with a wingspan smaller than your average car, cruising at a really slow 115 miles per hour. When it reaches its target, it just dives and explodes. And the real kicker? It only cost $20,000 to $50,000 to produce.
The $4 million shield. So how exactly does the American empire defend against this cheap, unstoppable threat? Let's take a look at the shield designed to catch these flying triangles.
This is the utter mismatch we're dealing with. On one side, you have the Shahed 136, small, hugging the ground, and dirt cheap. On the other side is the primary shield, the Patriot missile interceptor. It's a massive technological marvel, highly advanced, but it costs an eye-watering $4 million per shot. And because these drones fly so low and are so incredibly small, the advanced Patriot actually misses a lot. Because of that, the military has to fire 2, sometimes even 3 of these $4 million missiles just to guarantee a single hit. Let this sheer, brutal math of that sink in for a second. The United States is forced to spend up to $200 to shoot down every single dollar the enemy spends launching a drone. It's just an utterly unsustainable mathematical equation for any nation, no matter how wealthy their treasury is. But believe it or not, the horror story goes well beyond the price tag into a crippling supply chain crisis. The defense titan Lockheed Martin produces about 620 Patriot interceptors in an entire year. Meanwhile, Iran can manufacture between 200 and 500 of these cheap drones every single month. They can literally build more in 30 days than America can manufacture interceptors in 12 months. You don't need a PhD in military strategy to see exactly how this arithmetic ends up. On top of that, the drone's true genius is its mobility and stealth. You can park an innocent-looking civilian truck behind a building, fire 5 drones into the sky, and drive off to blend into regular traffic before a satellite even registers the launch. Contrast that with the Patriot system. It needs 6 major components, massive antennas, and at least a 30-minute setup time. And once it's deployed, it's completely visible from space. You can't hide it. The second the enemy knows its location, a $4 million defense system just becomes a massive sitting target itself.
Profit over efficiency, which brings us to the root cause of this whole mismatch. How exactly did the greatest military in human history get completely outsmarted by a glorified remote-controlled plane?
Well, our sources highlight a major systemic critique here. The entire American military strategy is anchored in an outdated Cold War era. For decades, the focus has been on building the scariest, most intimidating, and most expensive weapons possible. The hope was always that the mere sight of them makes the other side blink first, rather than actually building adaptable, practical defense systems for modern warfare.
It's exactly like taking a massive, terrifying-looking bodybuilder who has never actually been in a real street fight and throwing them into a cage with a scrappy, relentless opponent who is half their size. All those expensive, incredibly sculpted muscles are rendered completely useless when faced with a relentless swarm that just refuses to play by traditional combat rules.
The source analysis points to a pretty cynical reality. The defense industry profits from expensive weapons, not effective ones. Think about it. Building a highly efficient $50,000 interceptor drone doesn't create billionaires or massive defense conglomerates. But securing government contracts for $4 million missiles? That absolutely does. So the critique suggests this system was fundamentally designed to enrich creators via lucrative contracts, rather than to actually win a highly mobile, modern war of economic attrition. And speaking of systemic vulnerabilities that leave you entirely exposed, this exact kind of exposure isn't just happening on the battlefield. It is happening right now to your personal data online. When you're researching sensitive topics or doing a deep dive into the invisible scaffolding of global power, you're leaving a digital footprint. Most standard AI tools out there actually train on everything you type, absorbing your research.
Bankrupting the empire. Let's pull all these threads together to really understand the macro scale of this broken equation. What does this actually mean for the global balance of power? The absolute crucial takeaway from these sources is this: the empire isn't being defeated by superior firepower. It is being bankrupted by its own arrogance, bleeding the global economy in the process. Every single day this asymmetric conflict continues, the superpower isn't losing a contest of physical strength. Instead, it's suffering a totally self-inflicted economic wound that threatens the invisible scaffolding holding up the entire global economy.
So I'll leave you with this final thought as we wrap up this explainer. If the ultimate collapse of the global defense system truly comes down to simple math, and if the future of warfare is undeniably cheap and mobile, are we watching the final inevitable bankruptcy of an arrogant empire in real time? Thank you for watching. Stay curious and keep questioning the systems around you.